What's up, everybody? Welcome back to class. All right, today is going to be a really short lecture that I'm dropping on you that should be titled the Yalta Conference. You would want to put this in your European theater notes for World War II. Now, we've been kind of covering like the war in Europe, the D-Day invasion, the Nazi concentration camps getting liberated, and the whole world being shocked and disgusted by what had happened there. This conference actually plays out right towards the end of the war. Nazi Germany, when this conference takes place, they're still fighting. Hitler isn't dead yet. The concentration camps are still running. But it's a couple months before the end of the war, and essentially the Allied powers at this point know we're going to win the war. That much is certain. It's just a matter of how long is Germany going to be able to hold out. So this all kind of takes place in the closing months of the war as all the Allied countries, the British and the Americans from the West and the Soviets from the East, are pushing in, and things are about to fall for Nazi Germany. Now, where is Yalta at? Okay, so you should have a heading in your notes now, and there won't be a ton of notes for you to add in here. But Yalta is a city in the Soviet Union. So it's the three big Allied powers are going to meet together, and they're going to send their leaders, even though these guys are all pretty old men at this time. They do ship them all over to Yalta in the Soviet Union, which is a town. It's a city on the Black Sea. It's actually kind of covered on this world map I have here, but essentially right here, kind of in between where Europe and Asia meet together. The countries that are going to be represented there, let me go on to the next slide here for you. It's going to be the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. So, key things that I'd want you to have for the Yalta Conference, I want you to have the three big allied powers, and then who represents each one. So, a lot of times when big countries are negotiating like peace treaties or something for the end of a war and policy and, what's going to be happening in the world as we move forward, like a president or a prime minister or a dictator will send a representative to go, negotiate on their behalf. Well, in the case of the Yalta Conference, and I think this is kind of fitting for wrapping up World War II and what an epic sized conflict this was. It was kind of seen as, hey, that's not going to cut it. Just sending representatives there and middlemen to go and negotiate this deal. That they really wanted to have all three of the actual leaders show up and represent their countries and start kind of hashing things out. Essentially, what's going to be talked about at the Yalta conference is basically how are we going to wrap up World War II, and then once we do, we have won and defeated the fascist powers, the Axis powers. Where are we going to go from here? Because the world is in shambles. Much of Europe has been bombed back to the Stone Age. Millions of people, and they really don't even know exactly how many people died during World War II. But it was epically high casualty rates. Some were up more than 50 million, and probably not quite past about 75. But I'll see different stats. Quoted from different sources. Anyway, regardless of that, the casualty rates are up in the tens of millions. And it's kind of like, no, once the dust settles, where are we going to go from here? Because really, these three countries are going to be the three dominant powers out in the world after the war wraps up. Okay, so make sure you have in there countries that are meeting again are the United States, and I want you to know we were represented by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. Okay, he was our president at the time. We have Great Britain is going to be represented by their prime minister, Winston Churchill, and then the Soviet Union or Russia. Okay, you could put either or both there. Is going to be represented by their premier, it's called, but essentially he's just a dictator, an authoritarian dictator, and his name was Joseph Stalin. All right, so I put all three of the flags on here. I made the British one a little bit smaller because as you might guess, of the three powers, at one time, Great Britain was probably back pre-World War One, they were the biggest and strongest empire on planet Earth. But then going through World War One and World War Two, even though they come out on the winning side of both of those conflicts, the British Empire is kind of it's on its last legs, and it's going to start to kind of crumble and disintegrate. So really, you have kind of at this conference, there is some tension because I've mentioned this before through the unit, but America and Great Britain, or Franklin Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin, they're our countries didn't see eye to eye. We have very different systems of government. We really don't trust each other. So why the heck are we in an alliance together? Well, it's kind of like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Essentially, we get lumped together where we do have America has a lot in common with Great Britain. So you'd kind of put America and Britain kind of together on one team, and then the Soviet Union, that communist country, on the other side. Um, we don't see eye to eye. And almost as soon as the war, even before the war is done, tensions start to kind of rise between these two big, allied superpowers. They're going to really be dominating the world in the wake of World War II. All right, so here's a photo of the three guys. Look at these old geezers up there, all sitting there getting ready to go to the negotiating table and chat stuff out. Notice that something that's worth, I think, pointing out, all sitting there. Typically, when you have a big conference like this, they would usually have all the leaders standing up, doing their photo op. But America insisted that all three of the world leaders be sitting. And why would we do that? This is something that I haven't talked much about, but I did mention it a few times. Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was a kind of a young man, he contracted polio. So from the time he was about 30 on in his life, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He was in a wheelchair, but he always had looked at like being in a wheelchair would kind of make him appear weak. And think about it, for just the optics of this, and this is a photograph that's going to be seen all around the world. They definitely, like most people in America, didn't even know the president was paralyzed. This had been kept pretty hush hush. So anyway, most of the time when you see FDR, he's usually seated, but there's actually only two photos that are known to exist ever of him in a wheelchair, because he didn't want that out. He didn't want the American public or the world to know that, because he thought it would make him appear weak. So anyway, like obviously Stalin and Churchill, they know he's in a wheelchair. They're meeting with the guy and talking with him, but they negotiate this ahead of time and agree that all three of the leaders will be seated, because FDR didn't want to appear weak by being the one guy sitting down below them all in a wheelchair while the other two were standing. So anyway, a little bit of the story behind that. Also, this is one of the, there's not a ton of color photographs from World War II. Color photography was just starting to come out at the time. Anyway, there's a color photo of the three guys, and I think it shows them all pretty well. Now, big decisions that come out of the Yalta conference, they discuss a whole laundry list of things, but the three key things, the most important things that I'd want you to have in your notes, and this stuff, hint, hint, might be on a quiz or on the exam down the road. Here are the decisions they come up with. The, first up, Germany isn't defeated yet, but they know that in the upcoming months, Germany is going to fall. It's just a matter of time. How are we going to divide up Germany at the end of the war? Because we can't, like at the end of World War I, we just toppled the German government. We set up a new republic there, kind of a government like Britain or America would have. And how did that work out? Well, you had a guy like Hitler, within 20 years rise to power, and another even bigger war broke out. So everybody agrees that we can't do that again. We need to come up with some sort of a better plan. Now, all the Allied countries kind of wanted a piece of Germany, some of the spoils of the war. And, Germany essentially should be a powerful country again somewhere down the road, but everybody wants to mold Germany kind of into their own image. So, what do I mean by that? Well, Great Britain and America, FDR and Churchill, they both want to make Germany into a republic, and then they want to kind of guide it and scaffold it and make it more of a government like along the lines of the kind of government we have here in America, right? We're hoping to build them into an ally. That's kind of a long-term goal over the next generation. Now, Joseph Stalin, who's the Soviet leader, that's a communist country. He absolutely doesn't want that. His vision is, I want to go in and, he feels like Russia has suffered the most and by far had the most casualties and spilled the most blood in defeating Nazi Germany. He wants to rebuild Germany as a communist state that he can kind of dominate. But basically, all of them kind of, after negotiating and going back and forth, nobody is going to totally give up their claim on Germany. So, kind of common sense wise, the American army, if you follow my cursor over here at the map, Great Britain would be like the island right up over here that you don't see in the map. The American and British armies are coming in from the west. Russia would be over here. They're coming in from the east. We're going to divide it essentially right down the middle, and you're going to see Germany gets broken up initially into four chunks. Okay, but that's going to change pretty soon after the war, where you have Great Britain getting this northern chunk that's closest to the island of Great Britain. America's going to get this chunk down in the south, and then France, which has kind of been out of the war since about 1940 when Germany had conquered them, they're going to be getting back on their feet, and they were seen as even though they're not represented at this conference, it was kind of seen as, hey, France is going to be a world power again too, so they can help us reconstructing Germany. France is going to be more in line with Great Britain and the United States. So French get the smallest chunk of Germany that's going to be right on the French-German border there. And then the Russians coming in from the east, they're going to take this big eastern chunk over here. The East Germany is what it's going to be called now. We're going to get into this more down the road, probably a couple weeks from now. But very soon after the war is done, within a year or two, Britain, France, and America, we are all kind of on the same page. We're all democracies. We're kind of buddy buddy. We trust each other. We're going to combine our chunks together. So essentially, moving forward, the plan at the end of Yalta was there was going to be four chunks of Germany, one controlled by each of these powers. Eventually, though, it's going to boil down to there's going to be two Germanys, East Germany and West Germany. West Germany will be the free, like democratic part of the country, and then East Germany is going to be a communist dictatorship that is controlled essentially by the Soviet Union. All right, so the decision of how Germany is going to be divided up—that's one of the key points that's getting decided at the Yalta conference right before the war is wrapping up. Next up was the future of Poland. Now, Poland is this country, if you look at the map again, right over here, immediately to the east of Germany. Remember, that was what set off the whole war in Europe to begin with, was when the Nazis invaded Poland, that was like the final straw. And then finally, the British and French declared war on Nazi Germany, and World War II starts up. Before World War II, Poland was a democracy. We were actually in pretty friendly terms with Poland, and they aspired to be a country like Great Britain, France, or America. But Poland had the geographical misfortune of being positioned between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. So they get gobbled up in this conflict and conquered. Now, we're worried about our friends in Poland. Actually, there was soldiers that had escaped out in the early days of the war that have been fighting alongside the American and British troops really for years now, trying to liberate Europe and their country of Poland. Those guys, like the Polish government that was in exile, and a little bit of their army that was able to escape the Nazis that's been helping us out, they're adamant. They want to go back to being a democracy. Poland wants to, or at least the majority of the people in Poland, they want to decide their own fate. They want to be an independent country, and they don't want any of the outside powers telling them what to do. They're like, hey, this war wasn't our fault. We just want our country back. Now, the problem is, who's coming in from this side, marching across Poland to defeat Germany? Well, it was the communist Russian army, or often called the Red Army, because red is like the color of the communists. So Stalin has his army at the end of the war. Like actually, when the conference is going on, most of the Red Army is actually fighting the Germans in Polish territory. Uh, we're worried that once Stalin's got his troops in there, maybe he's just never going to leave, and then he'll try to make Poland a communist like dictatorship that is going to be dominated by the Soviets. That's what we're scared of. So actually, at the conference, Stalin promises that he will let Poland have free, fair, democratic elections, that Poland will be a free country again, and that he won't dominate them or tell them what to do or come in and set up a new communist government. So the future of Poland is another big issue there. Now, I think a little side note that you could put in parentheses or an asterisk next to it. We don't know this at the time, but Stalin lies. He promises that he'll let Poland have elections again and that he'll move his army out of there after the war is all done. He lies about that. He keeps his army there and he forces Poland to become a communist dictatorship, which that's going to be a big point of contention and a problem down the road that we'll get back to when we're hitting our Cold War unit. And then the final thing Remember, this was a two-theater war. Uh, we decided, like, strategically at the beginning of the war, this was a issue that America had to really think about. Japan bombed us at Pearl Harbor. That's what pulled us into the war in the first place. But then Nazi Germany declared war on us 2 days after the Pearl Harbor attack. So we got thrown into a two-front war. We had to decide, how are we going to divvy up our manpower and resources? Well, remember, this has shifted as the war has gone on. But initially, it was about 90% of our manpower and resources was going over to fight the Nazis because we felt like they were the bigger threat, and we needed to help out our allies, the British. And we kind of had the attitude that, Japan is out there in the Pacific. We'll get to them when we get to them. We felt like very confident that we could beat them in a war at any point, but we need to take care of Germany first, and then we'll turn our focus onto Japan. And in fairness, even by Japan's own estimates, remember, they thought that they only had about a 3% chance at winning a war against America. So I think that that's something probably everybody could agree on. Well, Japan has a lot of fight left in it, and the war in the Pacific has been going much slower than the war in Europe, and progress has kind of crept along at a snail's pace, which kind of makes sense when you think only about maybe 10, I mean, at this point, 20-25% of our manpower and resources was being dedicated to fighting the Japanese out in the Pacific. Well, once Nazi Germany falls, there's going to be a massive redeployment. And then now we don't have a war in Europe going on anymore. And we're going to put our whole focus on Japan and try to wrap that war up out in the Pacific as soon as possible. We do know this: we fought the Japanese enough that we found them very concerning. That, like, Hitler told his soldiers to fight to the death, but almost no German soldiers actually did that. There were certain, like, SS units, the black shirts, that were like the most loyal, hardcore Nazis that did. But the average German army, for the most part, when they got into hopeless situations in the closing months of the war, most of them surrendered, and they wanted to survive the Nazi regime. Japan, they have a totally different mindset. The average Japanese soldier is ready and very much willing to die for the honor of their country, their family, to die in honoring the emperor. So when Japan gives the order in some of these little Pacific islands that everybody's going to fight to the death, what we're finding is, up to this point in the war, their soldiers actually do fight to the death, which, man, that's going to be really rough taking them out, even though we know we're going to win the war in the big picture, in the long haul. It could get epically bloody out there because of just the different Japanese mindset, and how much they're willing to sacrifice, and just how hardcore their soldiers are. So, thinking about that a little bit, we end up talking to the Russians, even though we don't trust the Russians that much, and we're worried that they're going to try to gobble up territories and turn them into communist states like they are. At the same time, America is actually concerned about casualty rates, and we want to get as many of our young men back home as possible. Now, America throughout the whole war loses about 450,000 guys. That's about how many American soldiers died during the war. Russia, in contrast, they don't really know how many, because Stalin did not care about sacrificing his own men to achieve his goals and his aims. Uh, the Soviet Union, up to this point in the war, they've lost between 9 to about maybe 11, 12 million soldiers. And if you count civilians in it too, they're probably up in the 18 to mid 20 some. I've seen some estimates say as high as like 30 million Russians have died. So think about that. That's like almost like the whole state of California getting wiped out. They've just had catastrophic losses. And honestly, Stalin, what, I don't know that he actually said this, but a famous quote that always gets attributed to him is, "One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic." Just to show you, I mean, he's a pretty ruthless guy. Anyway, we're fairly convinced that he will probably help us out, but he's going to want something in return. So we negotiate with him, and we figure the war against Japan is going to be quite bloody as we wrap that up. So we talk Stalin into, and we ask him, "Will you give us help conquering Japan?" And Stalin agrees to it. He says he's going to need a few months, maybe up to a year, from the time the war ends in Europe for him to remobilize his army, move it across Asia, and get out there and to actually like help and assist us. So that's the agreement that comes out of there, that he is willing to help us. He'll send the Red Army out there. America and Russia will keep they will stay in the alliance together and defeat the Japanese too. But what is he going to want in return? He's probably going to want more territory. So if the war had, it doesn't play out that way, but if it had, Japan probably would have been divided up in a very similar fashion to Germany, where you would have maybe not East and West, but it probably would have likely been a North and South Japan, where one of the chunks would have been communist and the other chunk would have been like friendly to America and a republic or a democracy. Okay, that's what I had for you today for the Yalta conference. Really important conference that a lot of the future of the world is being decided there as the dust and ash settles from World War II. Another little sad note that I'm going to get more into this down the road, but shortly after this, I forget exactly how long, but I think within about a month or two of the Yalta conference, FDR unexpectedly dies. He essentially has like a brain aneurysm or like a stroke. He had just been in poor and failing health for quite a while. He was a heavy smoker, heavy drinker. Actually, all three of these guys were very heavy smokers and drinkers, and none of them were in great health, as you might be able to judge from that photograph. Nobody was really expecting FDR to die, but within a month or two of the Yalta conference, he dies, and then his vice president, Harry Truman, is going to be the new president of the United States. But we'll get more into that down the road. Okay, hopefully this all made sense. If you have any questions about the Yalta conference or exactly what you need to know about it, because I know I have a tendency to babble and give probably more details than I need to, just shoot me an email, hit me up, and I will get back with you and fill you in on what you need to know. Take care.